Hi folks, welcome to Deconstructing the Game. I'm Ryan. I'm doing a video today that is a little bit different, and rather than going around and investigating things within the game and making speculations about what they could potentially mean, I wanted to draw in from a lot of sources, including news about potential updates to the game, statements by the developers, conversations we've had in the Deconstructing the Game Discord server, and also some of the conversations Mike and I have had just shooting things back and forth about the game. And basically, I'm going to talk about a sort of combined New Game Plus mode that could bring in a lot of these things and could put a lot of the things that people want in the game, solve some of the problems with making content after the endings of the game, and so on and so forth. Now, I want to thank Mike for inspiring me on this. He suggested something a little different to practice my machinima, and instead I came up with the idea for this. So if you don't like it, it's mostly on me, but I want to thank him for coming up with the idea. What this idea really boils down to is a combination of sort of a New Game Plus, expansion DLC, and reboot of the game that includes a lot of the things that people felt were missing. Now, this would take place after the events of the original campaign. Your decisions and potentially your progress would carry over, but you do not play as V. Now, I know that sounds weird, but hear me out on this. One of the biggest things that I felt was missing from Cyberpunk 2077 compared to The Witcher 3 was a really strong starting area. Much like a Legend of Zelda game, The Witcher 3 had one of the strongest starting areas I've ever seen in a game in White Orchard. It does a fantastic job of not only introducing the mechanics of the game to the player, but also introducing them into the world and giving them an idea of where they sit in that world. Now, I can see how this would be harder in a sandbox game like Cyberpunk 2077, but I think this would be a great idea to do what players have complained about a fair amount, that their backstory or their life path didn't really affect their character that much besides a few dialogue choices. So I think it would be interesting if there were a number of starting areas, possibly in some of the less used areas in the game, like the Badlands, for example, where characters got to sort of start out in this new story that introduced their unique character into the game, rather than just very quickly shoehorning them into a story where it feels like they're led along by the main plot characters. And so in these, you would also get to do something that a lot of people have talked about, of become more involved with a gang or a faction. So say if that was in the Badlands, that could be the Aldecalos. Or in the example that I'm going to use, I'm actually going to tease a little bit of the story from my Badlands Justice Machinima show I'm working on, and describe a backstory that I imagined in my head for my character while playing, and talk about how that could work in this potential New Game Plus mode. As I've shown in a few of my videos, I like to kind of pretend I'm the sheriff of Rocky Ridge. If you're a Blazing Saddles fan, you'll probably get that reference. But anyway, the way this would work as an origin story is a lot of players have kind of fantasized about being more involved with the police or with MaxTac, or following a similar path to the Cyber Psycho that we saw from the 2013 trailer, who we eventually met within the game. And so, as kind of a cool working your way up from the lowest, but not doing it too quickly like the plot of the original game does, it would be kind of neat if you started out as a deputy for the Los Padres Sheriff's Department, and you have, the worst equipment, you're not really backed up by corpo mercenaries like the NCPD is, and so you start out at sort of the lowest rung of law enforcement, just kind of dealing with gang members and nomads and stuff out in the desert, and then you slowly work your way into where you start working in Night City, potentially after solving a major Cyber Psycho incident or something like that, and it kind of brings you into that plot step by step, and you work your way up until eventually you do become an elite MaxTac officer, and that becomes your story for your character, and it starts at this very humble level in your starting area. You can probably start to see where I'm going with this a little bit, where if the player doesn't play as B, it solves a lot of the problems of the endings of the original game, but it would still carry over V's decisions in a really interesting way, in that you would find out how V's decisions in your original playthrough had affected the world over time afterwards, but through the eyes of the faction that you choose to enter the game through. And I think that would be a really interesting way to do it, and it would kind of make your choices more relevant all over again by reintroducing the player to the world without being saddled by how sort of relevant V has become and so famous in the world by the end of the game, and allowing you to experience it through the eyes of that faction instead, by the player's own choices. But also this would allow you to bring in some features that players have complained about. At the very least, if players started over as a new character, they would have the ability to change their appearance, but it would also carry over their progress if they wanted to, because I don't think it would really matter, honestly, if you were able to carry your stats over but you weren't B. You're just someone else who comes in with life experiences. And it would also allow things like player housing, for example. This here is just a mock-up I made. There's not a player housing mod yet, sorry. I just did this with appearance menu mod and object spawner, but I just wanted to kind of show what player housing could look like in the game, where since you're not V, you could start out with a house of your own in one of the many empty abandoned structures like this. Now I chose one that had some interior to make my work a little bit easier. I do just want to state here real quick for the record that filling in empty environments and building some kind of player housing I don't think would take a lot of resources. I was able to take this empty shell here and turn it into this quick mock-up trailer in about an hour. It doesn't take all that long to do this stuff, and I imagine that they have better tools than I'm allowed access to by the mod. But you can see here how easy it would be to just take any of these structures that exist out here in the game and turn them into something that could feel like a livable space that is, similar to the other living spaces that you can use already in the game. I'm just going to take a second here to show off my work a little bit. Even though this was just an exercise, I was pretty proud of it at the end. Excuse me while I burn up a little more unused stock footage while I do my conclusion here. But I think that an idea like this would be a really interesting way to let characters basically continue on from the story, but without feeling so tied down by the choices of the original plot. And it would also be a great way to introduce the features that people have been asking for in a new playthrough, rather than expecting people to go back and start the game over again just to see things like vehicle customization and then redo all the races. If you were doing that all from a different character's perspective, and also from a new angle of, say for example, going the police angle, if you were an undercover cop in a sort of Fast and the Furious kind of situation, and that was how you were involved in the races instead of doing it as V. It would be a really great way to do all this stuff, make it fresh, with actually fairly minimal work, just using assets that already exist, things that were cut, just reshuffling a little bit so that it works. And I think removing the shackles of being V, honestly, would make a lot of that work, and would make it a lot faster and easier to implement the things that people want into the game. That's just my idea. I hope you all found it interesting. Thanks for watching Deconstructing the Game.